Welcome to The Critique. Today we're looking at a deeply passionate video monologue about a public incident of anti-Semitic harassment that, honestly, exposes some massive issues with societal cowardice.
Harnessing that raw emotional conviction into focused intellectual deconstruction is going to elevate the persuasive power of this material far more effectively than relying on personal insults.
Right, exactly. Because when I was first reading through this, the author sets a remarkably high bar right out of the gate.
Yeah, they really do.
Like they're watching this innocent couple get relentlessly harassed in this artsy restaurant, and they make a really strong case for the gravity of the situation by comparing it to racism in 1940s Alabama.
Which is a super heavy, visceral comparison.
It is. It totally forces the listener to view a modern incident through this, universally understood historical lens. But then, almost immediately, the script just pivots.
Right.
The author starts calling the aggressors stupid people who are not very bright and emotionally immature.
Which, that's a completely understandable human reaction when you're witnessing something so infuriating. The frustration there is entirely authentic.
Oh, for sure. It's authentic. And honestly, looking at the behavior described in the material, the aggressors are acting totally ignorant.
Yeah, no doubt.
So my first thought was, well, why is calling them stupid a problem? It feels pretty accurate to the moment.
Right.
But the more I sat with it, it felt a bit like building this massive, sophisticated stage only to perform a really simple, crude play on it.
That is exactly the issue. It really comes down to the difference between authentic emotion and effective persuasion.
Right.
Because the weakness here is that introducing name-calling into a deeply serious analysis, well, it provides an easy out for critics.
Oh, totally.
It allows anyone who disagrees to just dismiss the whole argument as merely an angry rant, rather than a rigorous moral critique.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But there's actually an even deeper structural problem here. Calling someone unintelligent actually removes their moral agency.
Wait, hold on. How does it remove their moral agency?
Well, think about the underlying logic of the insult.
Okay.
If these aggressors are just not very bright, then they're merely ignorant, right?
Right.
They're just bumbling fools who don't know any better. It accidentally absolves them.
Wow, yeah, I see that.
But the author's core thesis is arguing the exact opposite. The author's trying to convince us that this harassment is a deliberate, nefarious, deeply rooted ideological evil.
Ah, I see. It shrinks the scale of the argument.
Exactly.
It drastically lowers the stakes. Like, if the threat is just a few stupid people acting out in a restaurant, then it's just a localized nuisance.
Right. We don't need to worry about the moral fabric of society.
Yeah, we just need a bouncer to throw them out.
Exactly. You cannot simultaneously argue that someone is a symptom of a demonic, systemic danger and also dismiss them as a harmless idiot.
Right. The two concepts just repel each other.
They really do.
So, how does the author fix this misalignment? I mean, if I'm the author, my blood is boiling, I'm watching this injustice unfold. So do I just sanitize my feelings?
No, not.
Like, do I just take the insults out and pretend I'm not angry?
No, you don't sanitize the anger, you rechannel it.
Okay.
The suggestion here is to meticulously dissect the cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy of their ideology and behavior, rather than attacking their raw intelligence.
Okay. Break that down for me. What does that redirection look like in the actual text?
Sure. So instead of stating they are stupid people, the material could highlight the sheer irony of the situation.
Okay. How so?
Well, for example, the text mentions these aggressors are operating in this progressive, artsy space.
Right.
The author should explicitly point out the cognitive dissonance of individuals who, likely claim to champion tolerance and anti-racism while simultaneously engaging in targeted, race-based verbal abuse in public.
Exposing that hypocrisy, it's so much harder than a simple insult.
Exactly. And it keeps the listener focused on the ideological danger being discussed.
That paints a much sharper picture. It traps the aggressors in their own ideological contradictions.
Yes.
You aren't just calling them names. You're actually proving that their worldview is fundamentally broken.
Right. You vividly describe the absurdity of someone carrying the banner of social justice while screaming at a couple purely because of their ethno-religious identity.
And when you dissect their behavior with precision like that, you invite the listener to join you in a sophisticated analysis.
Exactly. The listener feels smarter for seeing the hypocrisy rather than just feeling like they're overhearing a shouting match.
Right.
Establishing deliberate, logical bridges between isolated micro-incidents and vast macro-ideologies prevents the analysis from feeling disconnected or overly speculative.
Yeah, because here is where I got completely derailed reading this material.
Oh, really? Where?
Well, the author takes this very localized hypocrisy, right? This micro-incident at a table.
Right.
And suddenly, in the very next paragraph, claims this is the dawn of global communism and extremism.
Ah, yeah.
I got absolute whip.
You aren't alone in that. The leap in the text is just incredibly sudden.
It really is. One moment we're dissecting a video of a couple being harassed, and the very next we're talking about communism infiltrating schools and being forced to join ideological movements or be killed by them.
Right. It's a huge jump.
But playing devil's advocate here, I think the author feels the connection is obvious. To them, both are forms of tyranny. Why doesn't the audience see it that way?
Well, because every audience has a skepticism threshold.
Okay, fair.
The weakness is that the sudden leap from a specific video to broad condemnations of global systems happens too abruptly for the brain to process without evidence.
That makes sense.
It's like the connective tissue is entirely missing. So without explaining the why and the how, a perfectly valid warning just sounds like hyperbole.
It's like jumping from a leaky faucet to a tsunami warning without explaining the plumbing.
That is a great way.
Like a listener who is entirely on board with condemning the harassment in the restaurant might suddenly step off the train when global communism is brought up.
Right, simply because they don't see the tracks connecting point A to point B.
Yeah, they categorize the argument as a conspiracy theory and just tune out entirely.
Exactly. So the suggestion here is to build a clearer, step-by-step logical bridge.
Okay.
You need to demonstrate exactly how the localized behavior seen in the video serves as a symptom or a precursor to those larger, dangerous global movements.
Right. You have to show the listener the exact machinery of how a microaggression scales into macro tyranny.
I like that, the exact machinery. Because tyranny doesn't just manifest out of thin air.
Right. It starts with testing boundaries.
Exactly.
So what is the plumbing? How exactly should the author build this bridge in the script?
So, for a concrete example, before introducing communism or global extremism, insert a transitional thought explaining the mechanics of ideological takeover.
Okay, walk me through that. What is the specific tactic?
Well, you explain how the exact tactic of public intimidation seen in the clip perfectly mirrors the historical strategies used by authoritarian regimes to force conformity.
Oh, okay, so it's the weaponization of social discomfort.
Yes, exactly. In the restaurant, the aggressors create a scene so uncomfortable, so aggressively hostile, that they're gambling on two things.
Which are?
One, that the victims will eventually leave just to escape the abuse. And two, that the bystanders will remain completely silent because they're terrified of becoming the next target.
Ah, that is fascinating. The aggressors are counting on the fact that the bystanders are more afraid of social awkwardness than they are committed to justice.
Precisely. By drawing a direct line between the tactic used in the restaurant and the tactics used by those larger ideologies, the jump feels earned.
It feels urgent and logically sound.
Right. You explain that this is exactly how totalitarian ideologies operate on a national scale.
Wow. Yeah.
It starts with silencing a restaurant through fear, and it ends with silencing a society through the exact same mechanism.
It completely validates the warning. It turns the whole thing from a speculative rant into an undeniable historical progression.
Exactly.
The listener can now clearly see that the leaky faucet and the tsunami are part of the exact same water system.
And it really only takes 1 or 2 paragraphs to do it.
Right.
Just slow down, explain the shared tactics of intimidation, and then you can safely introduce the macro thread.
Makes sense.
Transforming a powerful condemnation of bystander apathy into a specific tactical toolkit for intervention creates a much stronger and more resonant call to action.
Right. Because the piece ends with this massive condemnation of the bystanders in the restaurant.
It does.
The author essentially says that indifference is a cosign to evil. Silence is complicity.
Right.
And I agree with the diagnosis. But it left me wondering, what did the author actually want those people to do?
Well, shaming an audience for their cowardice will definitely wake them up, but if you don't hand them a specific tactical toolkit for how to intervene, you just leave them paralyzed by guilt.
Exactly. The material rightly shames the cowardice of the patrons and staff who did nothing but watch.
It does. It challenges the listener directly, asking, would you have spoken up? Or would you have sat there staring at your plate too?
But the weakness here
is that the author seems to assume the bystanders didn't act because they're morally bankrupt.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of the bystander effect.
Right. It leaves the listener without any clear guidance on what constructive, effective intervention actually looks like in volatile, real-world situations.
Yeah, the bystander effect often happens not because people are inherently evil or apathetic, but because human beings literally freeze when they encounter sudden social aggression.
Oh, totally. Their brains are flooded with cortisol.
Exactly. They experience cognitive overload, and they lack a protocol. They just don't have a script for how to react.
That makes total psychological sense. People freeze because they think, if I step in, will I make it worse?
Right.
Will this person pull a weapon? Will it get violent?
Exactly.
They run through a dozen terrifying scenarios in 3 seconds, and the result is paralysis.
Yes.
So, to fix this, should the script just tell the audience to get up and yell at the harassers? Tell them to get in the aggressor's face?
No, absolutely not. Screaming back often just escalates the danger.
Right, that makes sense.
The suggestion here is to pivot the conclusion from simply exposing the problem of silence to equipping the audience with actionable, practical methods for safely standing up to verbal abuse.
You have to move from diagnosis to empowerment.
Exactly. Give them the script they're missing.
All right, so give me the toolkit. What does that actually look like in practice for a listener who wants to be brave but doesn't know how?
Sure. So a concrete example would be providing 2 or 3 immediate steps a bystander could take.
Okay.
Suggest that a bystander could simply stand up and physically place themselves next to the victims to create a visual barrier.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, they don't even have to say a word to the aggressor.
Right.
Or they could immediately walk to the front counter and demand that the restaurant manager enforce a zero-tolerance policy and call security.
I love the barrier idea, offering quiet solidarity.
Yeah.
But what if the listener isn't physically imposing? What if standing next to the victim feels too dangerous?
Then you give them a psychological tactic.
Okay, what's that?
Teach the audience to loudly ask the harassers a disarming, completely unrelated question to break their momentum.
Wait, what do you mean by an unrelated question?
Well, when someone is engaged in a verbal tirade, they're in a psychological loop.
Right.
If you yell at them to stop, you just feed the loop.
Ah, okay.
But if you walk up and loudly ask, hey, do you know what time the parking meter expires outside? Or did you drop these keys?
Wow.
Their brain actually has to pause its aggression to process the unexpected information. It disrupts their pattern.
That is a brilliant de-escalation tactic.
Right?
It completely short-circuits the confrontation without getting into a screaming match.
Exactly. And giving the audience a practical blueprint like this fulfills the ultimate goal of the piece.
Right.
It honors the core message of the source material, which is that we must stand against evil by actually showing the audience how to stand.
It shifts the entire dynamic of the ending. The piece stops being just a mirror reflecting our societal failure and becomes an actual manual for fixing them.
Exactly.
It answers the fundamental, now what, that every listener has when they're confronted with a heavy, terrifying truth.
And when an audience feels equipped rather than just scolded, they're far more likely to share the material. They want to pass the toolkit along.
Absolutely. Well, this critique highlighted 3 high-level opportunities to strengthen this powerful source.
Right.
First, shifting the tone away from personal insults and instead exposing the ideological hypocrisy of the aggressors to elevate the argument's authority.
Yeah.
Second, building clear logical bridges between the micro-incident in the restaurant and the macro threat of sweeping ideology by explaining the shared mechanics of social intimidation.
Exactly.
And finally, transforming the condemnation of cowardice into a practical toolkit that equips bystanders with concrete ways to safely intervene.
The foundation of this piece is incredibly strong. I highly encourage the author to implement these structural and tonal shifts to truly unlock its persuasive power. And please, submit the revised work back to us for another critique.
It's absolutely vital to have the sensitivity to detect the tremors of societal decay when they happen in a local restaurant. But the true value of your analysis isn't just in sounding the alarm, it's in clearly illuminating the exits and showing everyone exactly how to navigate the shaking ground together.